Alright, let's do it. Before I get into it, let's talk about Paidon, a manga inspired by Astro Boy, penned by a team of writers, including AI. So that's a real thing that happens. According to the article on Asahi, which I'll be clever and link somewhere, the AI came up with the rough story, protagonist, and original ideas for character designs. Human animators, who filled in the story's details, drew the illustrations. Anyway, on to the episode. I think this was the episode where I really actually started to feel disturbed by this whole premise. Up until now, I think there were few things here and there, but I also knew I had a habit of overthinking things. But after this episode, I think this might have been where it finally started to sink in. As time went on, it was just harder and harder to ignore and just think, oh well, it's just me overthinking it. This episode tells us that people get to choose the faces of their humour gear, which makes me feel very uncomfortable. Why is that necessary? If you are employing someone, their appearance should not matter. So if you genuinely consider humour gear employees, why does it matter? This isn't the bit that really solidified my feelings at the time. This is just something I wanted to mention. I think at the time I was irked, but I understood why this was a choice that was made. It's, cool. But with the feelings I have now, no, I hate it. It's invasive, and it's only a matter of time before people start doing some really disturbing things to humour gear. But I understand why this feature might not necessarily be considered weird to other people, so I'm not going to count that. However, then we get Aruto and Izu delivering a humour gear in a box. Red flag number 1. Humour gear are not your employees, they're a product you're selling. If they can't even walk to the place with you, they're not equal to you. And I just waited for Aruto to react to this, to be disturbed by it, to learn something and scrap that whole practice. I don't know, but just... You don't deliver your employees in boxes if you genuinely view them as equal. One of the stickers on the box says, please give me a name. Why is this not weird? So you can choose how humour gear looks and you can name them. They're pets! Why is everyone okay with this? Another says, I want to see the outside world, and that's just so sad, that hurts. Oh, it's just so disturbing watching them unpack a humour gear. Like, it's not the fact that this is how things are that disturbs me, it's the fact that our compassionate hero doesn't seem perturbed by it. It never does! Don't even get me started on the humour gear remote control, I'll cover that in the teacher episode. So the premise of this episode is that the manga artist is getting humour gear to draw for him, and I don't know if this is supposed to be a metaphor for relying too much on technology, which I always have opinions about. I'm pretty sure that's not the point, but I want to get into that for a sec. I guess as someone who never had restrictions set by my parents, but then again I only really had electronics and whatnot halfway through secondary school, and it's always, even to this day, been really low level stuff, and I'm an adult now so it doesn't really matter. But as someone who's always been allowed to self-regulate, using technology so much is not inherently bad. I see all the time people talking about how kids these days panic if they ever leave the house without a phone, and always get offended by that, despite the fact I'm not a kid these days. But I'm still someone who panics if my phone runs out of charge when I'm out, and that's because being disabled, I need to be able to stay in contact with someone at any time. And it always hurts to see people online being like, just go outside, because you know what? I'd love to, but that's not the easiest thing in the world when you have a crappy manual wheelchair and only one person in the world to rely on. And that's even without there being a massive pandemic going on. That's why I'm on the internet so much! Without technology, I would not be at university, because a brick university would not be an option. I would not have friends, because I'd have no way to reach out to people. I'd have nothing. I think nowadays a lot of kids and teens are accused of being addicted with their phones, while what they're actually doing is enriching their lives by being on the internet. They're socialising with friends, they're learning things from the comfort of their own homes without even knowing it. So it's always an argument that bugs me Back in my day, people used to work out change by hand. Yes, but now with the advancement of technology, people with dyscalculia can work out a checkout. It's great, isn't it? Anyway, back to the episode. There's also the issue of outsourcing your work to people who you're then not paying and keeping in terrible conditions, which I get not delving into in a family show, but just because they don't actually go that deep into it doesn't mean it's not terribly disturbing. The manga artist says that humour gear never get tired, which obviously means he's overworking them terribly, which is confirmed in just a sec. But it's so horrific that there are no laws or regulations to protect humour gear. Then the humour gear collapses, and the manga artist slaps him, shakes him, complains about it, and then chucks him on the floor. And Adato, your so-called employee, is being mistreated, and he does react to this, and it's so frustrating because he does, and for a brief second he genuinely seems to care. Manga guy sends G-Pen to do shopping after he stands, like he wants to say and do something about this, but he just doesn't know how. But it was a reaction he had to another humour gear just collapsing and then being thrown in front of him, and Adato says, "Sensei, I can't have you mistreating our humour gear," and the manga guy says, "Why? They're just tools, aren't they?" And then Adato just seems to give up. And I do understand if he's like between a rock and a hard place legally. I understand if he can't actually do anything in that moment. What bothers me is that nothing happens after that. You'd expect some kind of new clause in the contracts about not mistreating your humour gear or something like that. You'd expect him to dwell on the mistreating aspect, the poor humour gear stuck working with this abusive guy, but nothing. The aim in these episodes is always to prove a humour gear's worth to the mean old humans, never to care about the poor humour gear in these positions. Adato walks past G-Pen, who watched a fellow humour gear be worked to death, and reacted to it. You know, this is a person who witnessed something horrible and had an obvious reaction to it, and is no doubt working under the same awful conditions for this really terrible man. And Adato, good old Adato, asks if the manga artist is still at least coming up with the stories. Adato, you were doing so well! You genuinely cared about a humour gear for a moment, but now you're straight back to prioritising humans over humour gear being mistreated. Ask him if he's okay, for God's sake! Do you understand why it's Adato especially who gets to me? Furo was presented to us as someone who hates humour gear, so it's not annoying when he's seen to hate humour gear because we know he does. Yua was presented to us as someone who views humour gear as tools, so it's not annoying when she's seen to treat humour gear as tools because we know she does. Both are really bad sides to be on, and I assumed what with them being on the good side, they wouldn't hold these views forever. But Adato is someone who's presented to us as this kind, compassionate person who genuinely cares about humour gear, and aside from a few moments, he doesn't. Because if you truly cared about humour gear, you wouldn't give a crap about who's writing the bloody story at this point. And you wouldn't go to the person who's witnessed the awful bloody thing and go, the guy who's mistreating you guys at least all writes himself, doesn't he? Ask him if he's okay, ask him if he needs help at the very least. Tell him it's going to be okay, reassure him that you'll be replacing his friend's battery and he'll be alright. But if you're not even considering that he might have been affected by what he just saw, especially after standing up suddenly the way he did, then you are not treating humour gear as equal to humans. Fight happens, I miss baby Jin so much, and the guy demands replacement assistance, and Adato says, "Why don't you just draw it yourself?" Which I do understand, but why aren't you actually properly calling him out for mistreating humour gear? Tell him you're not going to send replacements if he's just going to mistreat them. And the thing is, if this was him trying to talk the guy out of ordering replacements in such a way that wouldn't get Adato into trouble, then I'd understand. Later on, Chester says that they have to send replacements. So I'd understand if Adato was like, okay, we can't quickly legally deny this guy, but I can try and talk him out of it, so I'll help the humour gear the only way I can by convincing the guy to draw for himself. That would have been different, but that isn't what we've been given. We learned from Chester that it's company policy to provide replacements within 24 hours, but Adato has put them on hold. And now, the thing is, at the time when he said humour gear aren't slaves, I read it as Adato putting them on hold because he didn't want to subject any more Humagir to this guy's mistreatment, but the way he says it, it's really difficult to try and explain what I'm feeling right now. He says that Humagir aren't slaves, and if he isn't motivated, he's just exploiting them. And that's just almost perfect. Like, he's almost got it. But he's still primarily focusing on the fact that this guy he looks up to is like that, and I do understand when people you used to look up to turn out to be horrible. Izu doesn't understand, and he goes, after all we saw, he doesn't even have passion anymore. He doesn't want Humagir for help, he wants them so he can be lazy. Even now, even with his slave statement, his focus isn't on the treatment of the Humagir, it's on the manga guy not drawing his own manga. We keep getting these moments where I genuinely think he might actually care about Humagir, but then it just goes straight back to the humans mistreating them. For a minute, it really felt like he'd put the replacements on hold because he didn't want Humagir to be treated as slaves, but it's all because he wants the guy to make his own art. He acknowledged that the manga artist Humagir were being exploited and treating like slaves. Stick with that line of thought! Especially with the line, after all we saw. You mean the guy mistreating the Humagir? The fact that Humagir should not be left alone with this guy? No, the fact that the guy has lost his passion. And the thing is, character flaws make a good character, but these flaws are never actually addressed. Usually when a character has flaws, the narrative treats them as such. Izu displays a sense of agency of her own in this episode, and I really wish she'd been allowed to develop more as a character. She had so many moments early on that I thought would lead somewhere. She doesn't seem to care about Humagir, she cares about what Adato cares about, which is the abusive guy's passion. But that's still something for Izu to go and do stuff on her own. We meet Seina in this episode, and the guy is just cruel about her. He says, an AI can't get tired, just leave them running until they break. Why is this guy not blacklisted? You know what, this kind of attitude is not one that can just change in an instant. It is downright cruel to subject a Humagir to this guy. Am I supposed to be sympathetic or something? Izu declares that the replacement shipment, has been officially suspended. Adato does not know about this. Izu broke the rules on her own. She's starting to break free from her place and learn how to act on her own. I remember being so proud of her in this episode. It turns out Korenosuke had told Izu to work with anyone who had passion in their hearts. That's what the company should be doing. That's what he said to her. So she made the decision to break the official rules and instead go by what Korenosuke told her. And I feel like this would have been an even bigger moment had she been doing it to protect Humagir, not for the manga artist or for Adato. She's still doing it because that's what Adato wanted. Even when she's acting on her own, it's still for him. And it's only episode 4, so I thought that maybe this would lead to her starting to act on her own more and more, until finally she does something that Adato maybe disagrees with for the sake of Humagir, not him. Because there's still a long way to go, but this was such a nice start for her. It was setting itself up to be a nice, gradual thing. You can care about multiple people. Adato starts pestering the manga artist, not about mistreating Humagir, but about the fact that he's not even writing his own stories anymore. And he then says this great message about how art shouldn't just be for profit, it should be because you enjoy it. And I wholeheartedly agree. Making money doing something you enjoy is nice, but you shouldn't be in it purely to make money, or you're in it for the wrong reasons. I get that. I get that it's supposed to be a message about how you should create things for you because you enjoy it. I think that's a really nice thing to tell people. But when you know Humagir are being mistreated by this guy, and that's not your focus, then I don't want to hear about it. It's just so weird because Adato starts talking about how much his manga means to him, how much the guy influenced him, trying to encourage him to start working on it by himself. He talks about how mangaka have the power to move people's hearts. That's an amazing job to have. And I haven't read that many mangas, but the most important media to me is Toku, Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, Ultraman, Godzilla. If there's a guy in a suit, I am there for it. It got me through some terrible times. All of the friends I have now, every single one of them is the result of me stumbling upon Toku. It's such an important part of my life. One of the most important things in my life. I wouldn't even be here without it. I'm a better person today. I am in a better place today because I accidentally stumbled upon krekeorca that one time and wanted to know what this Super Sentai was all about. People who create things really do have an amazing job, not even just people who get paid to do it. I have friends who write and draw, and when I wake up and find that someone I care about has uploaded something new, when I go on Tumblr and find myself tagged in an AO3 link, when one of my friends updates a comic and my other friend messages me saying I wrote something, can you have a look? That's the best feeling in the world. And this is such a heartwarming message to tell people, and it's true. But why do we care about the guy's passion when he's working his humour gear to death? The guy's passion should not be your priority. I very often lose a passion to do things. I don't then go out and start beating people up. I think if we just adjusted things slightly, if we lowered the mangaka's arsehole levels and we rose Arato's care for humour gear a little, everything else would have worked. If he'd have maybe been treating them as tools because he didn't know any better, but not actively working them to death and being so flippant about it. And if Arato had asked G-Pen if he was doing okay, then delivering that message wouldn't have felt so dodgy. If he'd also have been telling the guy, you know, don't abuse humour gear. But he's just too much of an arsehole to care, and Arato is too obsessed with helping him and not humour gear to see him as a nice, compassionate person. What he's saying out of context is wonderful, but when you put it into context, that's not what that speech should have been. Then a fight happens, and I don't like the fact that Arato says, G-Pen, the only one who can stop you is me, because this is not G-Pen actively attacking you. It bothered me in the beginning when Arato didn't really seem to have any sympathy about the fact he's having to fight humour gear. Then I was pleasantly surprised when he did show reluctance about fighting Mamoru. But he has to anyway, and that's difficult, but he does, in this moment, have to fight. But why did you have to say his name when you're about to kill him? I do wish his catchphrase had been something more sympathetic and compassionate, like, I'm sorry it had to end this way, or something like that. Especially if he's going to be personally addressing the humour gear in such a way that it makes it sound like they're actively choosing to fight you. Because it reads like, oi, evil guy, there's only one person who can stop you. You wouldn't talk like that about someone who's being forced to fight. In the end, the manga guy has suddenly changed his ways, and thanks Arato for opening his eyes, and it's just, this guy was a total dick 2 minutes ago and now he's suddenly nice. His behaviour before was just too extreme to feel any sort of satisfaction about him now working with one humour gear protege. Personally, because he's nice now. I like the idea of a human and a humour gear working on a manga together, but not after such extreme behaviour. Nobody seems to get repercussions for abusing humour gear. This is the episode! This is the episode where Horrible reveals that Jin is his son, and I knew that could only be the case if one or both of them were humour gear. And this is so exciting for me because I've always wanted an AI family portrayal, and now we have one. And it's one in which the AI child actually acts like a child, like they would, not like an emotionless adult, like every other child AI character. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Next episode, can't wait, so happy!